very young age, had lost her mom and dad. But God was very gracious to her, and she was allowed to live with her great uncle Mordecai. Now, Esther, through the years of living with her great uncle, came to know God as being God because of the way her uncle lived and the way her uncle prayed. Esther also learned to pray like that. Now, Esther, one day having lived with her uncle for many years, was asked to come to the king's palace. And the next thing she knew, the king wanted to marry her. So Esther became Queen Esther. Can you imagine that? Living with your great uncle out in the village, not that rich, and now all of a sudden living with the king, being the queen? But her uncle Mordecai never wanted to be far from Esther because he loved her and he wanted to protect her. Now, Uncle Mordecai usually stayed around the gates of the city to listen what was happening. One day he heard of a plot from Haman, who was a very mean man. Now Haman wanted to kill all the Jewish people because Haman was very proud and he wanted everybody to bow down to him. And he even demanded that Mordecai would bow down to him, but Mordecai would not. Mordecai only bowed down to God. And out of his anger, Haman said, I am going to plot to kill all the Jewish people. Now, when Mordecai heard this, he called over Queen Esther, and he told Queen Esther about this plot, and he said, you have to tell the king. Wow, this was a hard thing to do because if the king didn't listen to Queen Esther, her life would be in danger. So she was very fearful. But Mordecai said, God raised you up for a time like this, and he brought you here for a time like this. And if you don't tell the king what's going to happen, someone else will. But Queen Esther said, I will do that. But let's have all the Jewish people and yourself and myself, we will pray and fast for 3 days. Now, this praying and fasting wasn't just simply a quick prayer. It was where all the people took off all their good clothes, put on sackcloth, and they didn't eat nothing for 3 days. And they cried to God to have their lives spared. After the 3 days, Queen Esther went up to the king, and the king listened to her. And the king understood what she was saying, and he spared the lives of all the Jewish people. And this mean man, Haman, he was the one who ended up losing his life. Now you see, boys and girls, prayer is the most precious thing that we can do when we want to talk with God. But prayer isn't something that just happens 1, 2, 3. It's something that should be part of our life. Let me tell you a story on how Glubby Wubby experienced this. Glubby Wubby learned that one of her friends was very poor and did not have enough money to buy food. Now this touched Glubby Wubby, and she felt very sad. So she thought to herself, I'm going to help and raise money for my friend. Now Glubby Wubby made a lot of crafts and was very good at it. So she went to her mom and dad and said, Mom and Dad, I want to help my friend and I want to sell all my crafts. Her mom and dad said, well, that sounds really good. And I think it is very hard to hear that your friend does not have any money. And it's great that you want to help her. But we have a question for you. Did you pray to God? Did you ask God about this? So that night, Glubby Wubby prayed to God. God, my friend doesn't have any food, and I want to help her by selling my crafts. So the next morning, when Glubby Wubby got out, she told Mom and Dad she prayed about selling her crafts for her friends. So can we sell them today? Her Mom and Dad said, well, have you asked God to help you sell your crafts? Because what if nobody comes? You put the table out today with all your crafts on it and you don't sell anything. You're going to be angry at God and you're going to say, God, why didn't you help me? but we want you to pray to God to help you sell the crafts. Think about it through the day. Pray about it to God. So Glubby Wubby did, and that night she prayed to God, God, I want to help my friend by selling my crafts, and will you help me by selling all my crafts for my friend? The next day, Glubby Wubby went down. She said to her mom and dad, I prayed that God would help sell my crafts. Can we sell them today? Her mom and dad looked at her and said, wow, that's great that you prayed for it. But now, did you ask God or did you tell God how much of the money you're going to give to your friend? Because what if you sell all your crafts? Will you give all your money? Have you prayed about it? So Glubby Wubby thought about it all day long and prayed to God. That night, Glubby Wubby went to bed. She said, God, I want to help my friend, and I want to sell my crafts, and I want to give all the money that I make to my friend. So she told her mom and dad. And the next day, she told mom and dad, I prayed for God to help me sell my crafts, and I want to give all the money. So mom and dad said, okay, let's set out the table, and they put the crafts on it. She put a little jar there, put the money in, and by the end of the day, she sold all of her crafts. And she looked at her jar. It was full of money, and she showed her mom and dad. It was right to the top. And she took the jar, she put it beside her bed. That night, she gave thanks to God for helping her sell all the crafts and for raising so much money. But she kind of looked at the jar and she seen, wow, there's a lot of money in there. And if I want to buy more crafts, I need money. So she thought to herself, I'm going to take a little bit of money out of the jar so I have money for crafts, to buy more crafts for myself. So the next morning she takes the jar, shows it to her mom and dad. They look at it and say, well, last night the jar was full of money. Now there's some money missing. And you want us to you want to give that to your friend? She said, yes. They said, but you promised God through your prayer you'd give all of it. So either you give all of the money or you give none, because you cannot ask God to do one thing and then do something else yourself. Now, this was a hard prayer for Glubby Wubby. So that night she took her jar, she brought it back upstairs. She prayed about it, and she says, God, I'm going to trust you. She put all the money back in the jar, and she gave it to her friend. You see, boys and girls, sometimes in life we're going to be asked to do some very hard things. Don't just quickly go to God in prayer, but be like Esther, be like Glubby Wubby. Take your time, pray to God earnestly, and ask God to help you. Amen.